checking out our live stream and making sure that it's working. All right, awesome. We are live. I am so excited to be talking with Meghan Schelzi today. She is the founder of Next Step Education. I am a great friend of Meghan, and we got to work together on the Live Your Optimal Life book. She wrote a beautiful chapter on this and following your purpose and your passion and finding out how you have the courage to be who you are in the world. I'd love to hear from you, Meghan, a little bit about the work you do as an educator and to improve and help children learn to read, which obviously I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, best job in the world. That's what I always say. Yes, I work with kindergarten, first and second graders, supporting them with reading, foundational literacy skills. I guess my method of doing it is rooted. I was trained in Orton Gillingham, so very systematic, sequential literacy instruction. I did that training back in 2020, and it really kind of set the foundation. I started implementing this systematic way of teaching reading, spelling skills, phonics, all of that. And it really I started to notice the difference it was making in the solid foundation and how sustainable it was for the students I was working with. So I have kind of evolved that business over the last 5 years. Now I have an in-person space where students come to work with me, primarily one-on-one. And yeah, just supporting those foundational literacy skills has really been my focus for the better part of the last 5 years.
I want to talk very briefly about how you shifted a little bit during the pandemic, because I remember you telling me a story of actually being in the garage with kids or something, trying to make this education work.
What
was that like for you?
I can see those pictures in my head so clearly that mom took. Working with kids is where my heart has always been. I coach skating. I babysat forever. So inevitably finding myself in early childhood education and elementary education was kind of a no-brainer. Even though I tried to go the secondary education route to start, I very quickly, high school classrooms were not for me, high school English. So I had left classroom teaching in 2019 after 10 years, kind of just wanted to see what else was out there. I was a journalism major in college, marketing. I never really explored that. And so I kind of thought I would do that. A couple months later, when COVID hit, families were looking for support around learning, essentially. So I kind of just started saying yes. I said yes to almost everything. Kids really kindergarten through fifth, sixth grade, all across the board. And that first must have been February of 2021. I live in New England. I live just in Boston. I was working just outside of Boston. It was freezing that February vacation, and nobody was really going away. Everything was closed. The world was pretty much locked down. And a mom had asked if I would come teach. We ended up calling it the Garage Academy. She had 2 boys, and maybe they were kindergarten and second grade. They were going to invite a couple friends to come over. So it was 8 kids in a garage in snowsuits, from 9 to 12, Monday through Friday. And we learned, we made it happen. it was insane. It was freezing. It was 18 degrees in the garage in New England for a week. But yeah, it was just how can we keep the learning going? I mean, I had so many stories from that year, how I used to drive around in my car and teach outside in fire pits and tents. It was really like Little House on the Prairie. So now every day when I walk into my center, I'm just I can't, it feels like a dream every day, because it was really such an evolution over the last 5 years, especially through COVID. So I'm super grateful to have a indoor
yes
with heat
and a roof. Hooray.
Yeah, so it's been really fun. Definitely a roller coaster in an evolution.
One thing I definitely want to talk with you about, which I really admire in you, is how you have evolved in life, how you have had the courage, which you talked about in your chapter in the book too. And it's who you are as a person, of letting your purpose drive you, your mission drive you. The fact that you would do all this, seemingly crazy stuff to make sure kids got to read and be there with them, right? That they could keep that education going. Things haven't stopped you.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how that's, has that continued to be the case? Like, is that how you're continuing to move through
Yeah.
life? Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that like?
There's like two parts that come to mind. The first is like if you had asked like 6 or 18-year-old me, like if I would ever be an entrepreneur, like absolutely not. Like I was such a routine rule follower, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something I wrote about in my chapter was basically like learning to live without a blueprint and how sometimes
Mm,
when you have that, it can really just be so limiting.
mm.
Um, I went to Fairfield U and I was at an alumni event last night and the president was talking and he said something about how a Jesuit education doesn't necessarily prepare you for a career, but it prepares you to live a life of purpose. And I
Mm.
feel like I didn't realize at the time when I was 18 to 22 going through Jesuit education really um like the lessons and the skills it was like embedding in me, but I feel like as I've, in my time since college that's been so deeply rooted in me is like continuing to like check myself and question and set intentions and move in that direction and let go of what is no longer serving me and say yes to the things that are filling me up. And it's definitely been a process to learn to like trust my gut in that way. Um, but it's definitely when you start to see evidence for trusting your gut play out, it's like, okay, like a little more, I can keep going that direction. I can keep creating without a blueprint. I used to call it throwing spaghetti at the wall a lot. I don't know that that totally honors the value of the work of doing it. So I kind of stopped saying that so much, but I think more like messy action and just um I'm becoming less and less afraid to just try things and create things and see if they land and create a class and no one signs up, I move on and do something else or if something takes off and I follow that. So paying attention to the energy has become more a part of my work, I feel like in the last couple of years.
I love calling it messy action. I've spent, as someone who has done the spaghetti at the wall and calling it that and relating to it as that, thinking of it as you're diving in and doing something
Yeah.
and you're not letting it stop you if it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
You go, oh, that didn't work. Oh, let me play. It's very
Mhm.
playful. It's like, okay, well, let me do
Right.
something else. Oh, let me do something else until you find the thing that feels
Right.
very natural. I want to make sure we talk about transformational literacy, which is what I know you talk about a lot, which I freaking love.
Yeah.
Um, and you wrote recently, every child deserves the tools to be a successful and confident reader.
Yeah.
And I love that the work that you do is everything seems to, from the outside at least, seems to be following that path, whether it's working with students systems of schools, the whole overall system, working with teachers that are delivering that
Mhm.
instruction, all of that. What advice do you have from a kind of a systemic approach that, what do you think that seems off in education, or what would you want to improve? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. I think when I think about like my work and what I've been doing for the last 5 years, really in the last year since opening my space, it's very like it's one to one. Like I work one student to one student and it creates a really deep, sustainable impact with that student and
Mm-hmm.
perhaps their family and perhaps, ripples into their classroom or their friends or their siblings. And I think now continuing to do that work, but my brain is always kind of going like, what's the bigger picture? Like, how can
Mm-hmm.
we I mean, we've talked about this, how like a lot of the statistics play out, in my head when I hear them, I can't kind of let them go. And, you know, things like 65% of the country, 65% of adults in this country are reading below a sixth grade reading level. Um, or 30-ish% of fourth graders are reading at proficiency. It's like you look at these numbers and it's like how are we not talking about this? I throw out some of these numbers with my friends and they're like, wait, really, is that true? Like 65% of adults are reading below a sixth grade reading level, and I'm like, yes, like that is true, like we need to do something about it. So that's kind of where my brain goes to, like the one-on-one work is amazing, and how can we kind of expand that? What can I do? Like, okay, I want to change those numbers. Like big term, like life mission, life purpose is to shift those numbers. And then like I very much like go to like breaking it down into steps. So it's like, well, how can I start to create a slightly bigger impact than just one-to-one, but
Hmm.
not dreaming too big that it's like impossible.
Right.
So it's like what, starting to partner with some local elementary schools, like Catholic elementary schools are kind of like my niche that I love to work with. I have experience in Catholic elementary schools. I taught and went to Catholic elementary school. So it's like, how can, getting in there and not even just working with the kids, but, working with those teachers, because the teachers are where systematic change is going to happen, right? Because they're teaching a new class every year. So if you teach the teachers, that change can kind of ripple out. So really like new teachers is my excitement right now, kind of supporting principals and teachers, especially in Catholic schools and some private schools, to see, like where is the gap? Where do they need support? Where, maybe do they have all new teachers in a certain grade level, especially in that K-2 window, or teachers who have moved around grade levels, so it's their first time
Mm.
teaching perhaps first grade. How can I kind of take the best of the tools that I've used through my Orton Gillingham training, rooted in all of this research, the science of reading, and I've kind of packaged it together into transformational reading. I've kind of
Mm.
picked out what I've found to be successful, and, you know, not having a blueprint, not having an entire thing all figured out, but knowing the pieces that I use, the pieces that I've seen make a difference, and how can I, start to teach and share that with other people in school.
I want to ask a question, but I also want to be careful how I ask it, because I know that you said that you don't want anyone to think, any teachers to think you're coming in and telling them what to do, or that you have the answer in a particular thing. So my initial question is, what advice do you have for teachers? But there might be a better way to frame that question of what support do they
Yeah.
need, or what would have helped you as when
Yeah.
you were a teacher just starting out.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to talk
I
about
think
in that
I
area?
think kind of my thoughts are really just again, when you look at like public schools, there's a lot of support, right? There's a lot of special ed support, there's a lot of specialists and things like that. I know I can really only speak to my experience working in a Catholic school and working with some Catholic schools, is that they don't
Mm-hmm.
have those big departments. They don't have all of those specialists. They don't have all those curriculum people. Um, so that's where I've kind of seen the gap. And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of where I've seen the need. It's the communication really is with the principals or the heads of school, because they don't have a literacy specialist necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a special ed department. Or
Mm.
again, in my experience, we had one special ed teacher in the entire K-8 school, one
Wow.
person.
I
So it's
can't.
like
Yeah.
those departments don't always exist. And then for the classroom teachers, they're responsible for teaching everything, not just academic, but social emotional and everything else. And it's like you're worried about so many things. So when you're a new teacher coming in,
Mm-hmm.
or a teacher 1 to 5 years in, you have all of these things to worry about. And it's like all I have like devoted my life to is just like this explicit foundational reading instruction. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, what tools do I have that I can share with you just to support you and give you tools or
Mm-hmm.
resources that might be helpful in creating like routines in your classroom, just in
Mm-hmm.
this one area. You're worried about all of this. Let me like take the load off with just this part. Um,
Mm.
yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm also wanting to ask from the perspective of parents. As a parent, that was always very passionate about my kids reading, right?
Mhm.
Is what, I know this might be a hard question to answer in a short time, but do you have like one like tip or something that would be helpful for parents that are hoping to encourage reading or improve their kids' literacy? Like, what would be the go-to tip for that?
Read to your kids.
Yes.
It is the number one
Right.
predictor of academic success, is like
Mm.
reading aloud with your child at home.
Oh.
Like there's so much research, I mean, around so many aspects of that. I mean, the modeling, the vocabulary, the oral comprehension, the oral fluency, like there's so much packed into you reading a story to them. Um,
Mm.
it creates that routine, it creates that relationship. Like there's so much around that. It fosters like a love of learning and a love of reading and stories and all of that. I mean, there's so much around vocabulary. I think it's like if you're reading 20 minutes a day, I think it's like, I forget the numbers, 2.1 million words per year or something. And if you're only reading 5 minutes a day, it's like 3,000. You know, it's like a
Mm-hmm.
massive shift. So of course, like 20 minutes a day, I know is hard. Like I'm not a parent, I'm not, but when you just kind of hold that slight perspective and it's like, it doesn't have to be your kid sitting alone. I just saw a reel yesterday that was like silent reading is not actually doing a whole lot to move your child forward in their reading.
Mm-hmm.
But listening to somebody read, like there's so much value in that. So I would say start there. And I would also say like they have to be developmentally like available for the learning. And sometimes I do find that people, you know, like pre-K, early kindergarten, right now I'm having conversations, a lot of like kindergarten
Right.
parents, and it's like, it's October, it's September of kindergarten.
Oh,
Typically, I don't really work with kindergartners
right.
until like March.
Right.
Um, I am noticing a lot of kindergartners like stayed back because of COVID. So now they're older. So there's this whole dynamic playing out where maybe they are developmentally ready in the beginning of kindergarten to have more explicit support.
Mm-hmm.
But like don't rush it, but also, you know, by like first grade, when there are kind of like these gaps or this like lack of confidence and stuff, it's like, okay, the rubber meets the road. Let's not wait for them to fail. Let's give them the tools to be successful. So it's kind of like a fine line, but I feel like really like mid kindergarten to end of first grade is like my sweet spot where I love to
Mm.
just like take kids and really in my program like twice a week for 3 months. In that window, the progress is just like undeniable. And it's so much fun to, you have a kid come in who can't read and then they can read. It's like, it's amazing. So yeah, it's that read to your kids.
When you said read to your kids, I had this, I felt visual, like my body, like I started crying a little bit because I just feel so grateful. I have to shout out to my mother who read to me every single day,
Yeah. And look
and
what you're
took
doing.
me to the libraries and look what I'm doing. And I read to my kids and like she read to my kid, it feels very good. And I know how that impact that it has had
Yeah.
on my life yeah, it's such a wonderful
I
thing to
think a lot of
do.
times people overcomplicate it. They overcomplicate what it has to look like or what they have to do, or parents don't
Right.
feel like capable. And yes, while they may not have the tools to implement, you know, structured literacy in their home with their child, kids don't want to learn from their parents anyway, but it's like
Right.
keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the
Yep.
library. Like there's a quote that I love that I use in emails like, you know, once or twice a year. It says children become readers on the laps of their parents.
Oh,
So
that's so
it's like
sweet.
even like modeling, even like you reading or reading a newspaper or listening to an audiobook, like modeling is another like great way to just like instill that like, oh, books, like kids want to be like their parents or like their older siblings. Like you look at a little kid who has an older sister or brother, like they're always trying to emulate that. So yeah. And then I think it's, you know, access to books is a whole nother conversation that we could
Right.
go on forever about, right? Not
Right.
everybody, books are
Yeah.
expensive,
Right.
especially books that young early readers can read, like decodable books. They're not sold at a Barnes and Noble necessarily. They're becoming more
Mm,
popular, but those kinds of books are really expensive, like even when I'm buying them. So it's just like
mm,
access to books is definitely something that needs to change. Uh,
mm-hmm.
because they're expensive and they're not always written for early readers. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a
Yeah.
whole nother thing.
Yeah. Well,
But
thank you
libraries
so
are
much.
great.
Yeah. I
Libraries are
love, oh my goodness. I love libraries so much. I'd
and they're
love,
free.
and they're free. Yes. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I want to thank you for doing the work that you do, both with the next generation of children on our planet, and for also looking at things from a systemic, like a big picture level. It's cool that you're involved in both. And is there anything else you want to let our listeners know before we wrap up today?
I mean, I'm always open to conversations. I feel like more and more people come to me with questions. A lot of my friends who have kids are now starting to be school age and like 4, 5,
Mm-hmm.
6, and they're looking. One friend just sent me a picture from Lakeshore the other day because she'd asked me for recommendations about like learning games for her kid. Like I love sharing resources and I
Mm-hmm.
love just having conversations. I think whether you're a parent or whether you're a teacher or whether you're like a principal or administrator, like I just have such a deep passion for education,
Mm-hmm.
for supporting education and expanding the impact of education. So, um, yeah, I think reach out if you just want to like chat about education or if you have any questions. And I'm always looking to just like help more kids learn to read. So
Mm,
if you fall anywhere in that conversation, let's connect.
yes. And so your website is nextstepeducationtutoring.com. Is
Mhm.
that correct? Yeah. So, and they can reach out to you through there. Is that the best
Yep,
way to get in touch?
that's
Cool.
it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking with
Thank you
me
for
today,
having
Meghan.
me. So good to see you. Thank you.
Yes, great to see you too.